Darkwood Hollow was not like other suburbs. Nestled on the outskirts of town, it was a place almost forgotten by time. The trees there strangled the light, casting shadows that seemed to move on their own. Stories of ghosts and ghouls were whispered by the few who dared to visit. But most people avoided Darkwood Hollow, leaving it shrouded in mystery and silence. The houses, once grand, now sat in disrepair. Windows were broken, doors hung off their hinges, and the air was thick with the scent of decay. At night, the wind howled through the empty streets, sounding almost like voices calling out in distress. The tales of disappearances and strange sightings added to the suburb's eerie reputation. Few dared to venture there after dark. There was one house that stood out among the rest, a mansion perched at the end of a long, winding road. It had belonged to the Blackwood family, who had vanished without a trace many years ago. The mansion was said to be haunted, a place where the spirits of the Blackwood family still roamed. It was to this very mansion that a pizza delivery would soon be made, setting off a chain of chilling events. Darkwood Hollow was not for the faint-hearted. The few who had entered its eerie embrace spoke of cold spots, strange noises, and a feeling of being watched. Yet some dismissed these claims as mere stories to scare children. But as the night of the delivery approached, the air seemed to grow colder, the shadows darker, and the sense of something waiting increased. It was a quiet night at Tony's Pizza Parlour. The clock struck midnight, and the last of the regular customers had long gone home. Tony, the owner, was about to close up when the phone rang. The voice on the other end was faint and distant, asking for a delivery to the Blackwood mansion. Tony hesitated. He knew the stories, but business was business. He called out to Jake, the new delivery guy. Jake was young and fearless, or so he thought. He had heard the stories, but didn't believe in ghosts. To him, it was just another delivery, albeit a strange one. He packed the pizza into his thermal bag, grabbed his jacket, and set off on his bike. The streets were eerily quiet, and the air felt colder than usual. As he pedalled towards Darkwood Hollow, an uneasy feeling settled in his stomach. The journey to the mansion was long and winding. The streetlights flickered, casting long, eerie shadows on the road. Jake tried to shake off the feeling of unease. He turned up the volume of his music, hoping the familiar tunes would drown out his fears. But as he entered Darkwood Hollow, the music seemed to fade, replaced by an unsettling silence. The shadows seemed to reach out towards him, and the wind whispered his name. As Jake drew closer to the mansion, his phone buzzed. It was a text from Tony reminding him to be careful. Jake laughed it off, replying with a quick "don't worry." But as he put his phone away, he noticed something strange. The streetlights had gone out, and the only light came from the faint glow of the moon. The mansion loomed ahead, dark and foreboding. The road to the Blackwood mansion was lined with ancient trees, their gnarled branches twisted like skeletal hands reaching for the sky. The farther Jake went, the thicker the fog became. It was as if the mansion didn't want to be found. The bike's tires crunched on the gravel, the only sound in the oppressive silence. Each pedal stroke felt heavier, like an invisible force was trying to hold him back. Halfway there, Jake's bike light flickered and died. Darkness swallowed him, and panic began to gnaw at his confidence. He fumbled for his flashlight, its weak beam cutting through the fog, just enough to see the path. Shadows danced around him, and every rustle of leaves sounded like footsteps. He kept his eyes forward, refusing to look back, afraid of what he might see. As Jake approached the mansion, he felt a chill that had nothing to do with the night air. The temperature seemed to drop with each step. The trees thinned out, revealing the mansion in all its eerie glory. It stood stark against the night sky, its windows like empty eyes staring into nothingness. The gate creaked open as he approached, as if welcoming him into the unknown. Jake's heart pounded in his chest. He steeled himself, reminding himself that ghosts weren't real. He pushed the gate open and walked up the cracked stone path to the front door. The mansion loomed over him, its shadow swallowing him whole. He hesitated for a moment, then rang the doorbell. The sound echoed through the empty house, and he waited, holding his breath. The door creaked open slowly, revealing a dark, empty hallway. Jake called out, but his voice was swallowed by the silence. He stepped inside, the floorboards groaning under his weight. The air was thick with dust, and the smell of decay was overpowering. He held the pizza box tightly, feeling like it was his only anchor to reality. The mansion seemed alive, watching his every move. Jake moved deeper into the mansion, his flashlight flickering as if it too was afraid. The hallway was lined with old portraits, their eyes following him. He couldn't shake the feeling that he was not alone. Every creak, every whisper of the wind made him jump. He called out again, louder this time, but only the echo of his voice answered him. The mansion seemed to be playing with him. He found himself at the foot of a grand staircase. The steps were covered in a thick layer of dust, undisturbed for years. He debated whether to go up or wait. A sudden cold breeze brushed past him and he shivered. He decided to wait, hoping someone would come to him. The silence was suffocating, and the shadows seemed to grow darker. His flashlight flickered again, plunging him into momentary darkness. Jake's patience was wearing thin. He called out one last time, his voice echoing through the empty halls. Just as he was about to turn back, he heard it, a faint, almost imperceptible sound. It was like a whisper, but he couldn't make out the words. He strained to listen, his nerves on edge. The sound grew louder, and he could hear footsteps approaching. His heart raced as he prepared to meet whoever or whatever was coming. The footsteps were slow and deliberate. Jake's heart pounded in his chest as he waited. The sound grew closer, echoing through the cavernous halls. He gripped the pizza box tighter, his knuckles white. The shadows seemed to come alive, swirling around him. The air grew colder, and he could see his breath in the dim light. He fought the urge to run, to escape the oppressive presence that seemed to surround him. Finally, a figure emerged from the shadows. It was a woman, her face pale and gaunt. She wore an old-fashioned dress, tattered and stained. Her eyes were hollow, and her movements were slow and deliberate. She reached out a skeletal hand, her fingers bony and cold. Jake could barely breathe, his fear paralyzing him. He handed her the pizza, his hand shaking as he did so. The woman took the pizza without a word. She turned and began to walk away, her footsteps echoing through the empty halls. Jake stood frozen, his mind racing. He wanted to leave, but something held him back. He watched as she disappeared into the darkness, the sound of her footsteps fading away. The silence returned, even more oppressive than before. Jake finally found the strength to move. He turned and made his way back to the front door, his steps quick and uneven. The mansion seemed to close in on him, the walls narrowing and the shadows growing darker. He reached the door and pushed it open, the cool night air hitting him like a wave. He stumbled out, his heart still racing, and he didn't look back. The mansion loomed behind him, a dark silhouette against the night sky. As Jake made his way back to his bike, he couldn't shake the feeling of being watched. The mansion's dark windows seemed to follow his every move. He fumbled with his keys, his hands shaking. The silence was deafening, and every rustle of leaves sounded like a whisper. He finally managed to start his bike and sped away, the gravel crunching under his tires. The ride back was a blur. The shadows seemed to chase him, and the fog thickened, making it hard to see. The streetlights flickered, casting eerie shadows on the road. He kept glancing over his shoulder, half expecting to see the ghostly woman following him. His mind raced with questions. Who was she? Why had she ordered the pizza? And what had happened to the Blackwood family? When Jake finally reached Tony's pizza parlor, he was pale and shaken. Tony took one look at him and knew something was wrong. Jake tried to explain, but the words wouldn't come. He handed Tony the money he had received, his hands still trembling. Tony counted the money and frowned. It was old, dusty bills, the kind that hadn't been in circulation for decades. Tony tried to reassure Jake, telling him it was just a prank. But Jake knew better. The fear he had felt was real, and the ghostly woman was no figment of his imagination. He decided to quit his job that night, vowing never to return to Darkwood Hollow. But the memories of that night would haunt him forever, a reminder of the chilling encounter he had experienced. Jake's story spread quickly. Some laughed it off as a tall tale, while others believed every word. The legend of the haunted pizza delivery grew, and Darkwood Hollow became even more notorious. Those who dared to venture there after dark spoke of cold spots, strange noises, and the feeling of being watched. But no one could explain the mystery of the Blackwood Mansion. Days turned into weeks, and Jake's encounter at the Blackwood Mansion became the stuff of local legend. But the mystery was far from over. One afternoon, Tony received another call. It was the same faint, distant voice asking for a delivery to the Blackwood Mansion. This time, Tony hesitated. He had heard Jake's story and didn't want to risk sending another delivery guy into the unknown. But curiosity got the better of him. He decided to make the delivery himself. He packed the pizza and set off, his heart pounding with a mix of fear and excitement. As he approached Darkwood Hollow, the familiar sense of unease settled over him. The shadows seemed to reach out, and the wind whispered his name. He steeled himself and continued on, determined to uncover the truth. Tony arrived at the mansion, the same chill creeping up his spine. He called out, but only the echo of his voice answered. He stepped inside, the floorboards creaking under his weight. The mansion was just as Jake had described, dark, cold, and oppressive. He moved deeper into the house, his flashlight flickering. He called out again, and this time he heard the faint sound of footsteps. The ghostly woman appeared, just as she had for Jake. She took the pizza without a word and disappeared into the darkness. Tony followed her, driven by a need to understand. He reached the grand staircase, but the woman was gone. He called out, his voice echoing through the empty halls. The silence was suffocating, and the shadows seemed to close in on him. Tony turned to leave, but something caught his eye, a portrait on the wall, its eyes following him. He stepped closer and saw the nameplate, Margaret Blackwood. The woman in the portrait was the same ghostly figure who had taken the pizza. As he stared, the air grew colder, and he felt a presence behind him. He turned, but there was no one there. The mansion seemed to pulse with a life of its own, and Tony knew he had to leave. Tony never spoke of what happened that night. He returned to the pizza parlor, pale and shaken, just like Jake. He counted the money he had received, old dusty bills, the same as before. The mystery of the Blackwood Mansion remained unresolved, and the fear lingered in the air. Jake and Tony both knew that something supernatural was at play, but they could never prove it. The legend of the haunted pizza delivery continued to grow. People whispered about the ghostly woman and the strange occurrences at the mansion. Some even claimed to have seen her, a pale figure standing in the shadows watching. But no one dared to make a delivery there again. The fear was too real, the mystery too chilling. Darkwood Hollow remained a place of fear and mystery. The mansion stood as a silent sentinel, its secrets hidden in the shadows. The stories of ghosts and ghouls continued to circulate, but no one could explain the truth. The fear lingered, a constant reminder of the unknown. The Blackwood Mansion became a symbol of the supernatural, a place where the past and present seemed to collide. In the end, the mystery of the haunted pizza delivery remained unsolved. Jake and Tony moved on, but the memories of that night haunted them. The fear, the cold, and the ghostly figure were etched in their minds. Darkwood Hollow and the Blackwood Mansion remained a place of terror, a haunting reminder of the unknown. The story of the haunted pizza delivery became a legend, a chilling tale that left everyone unsettled.